Okay, now the Gemara that we learned before. So the Gemara that we are in the midst of learning is really connected to the previous Gemara because we're in the midst of learning this Gemara that brings up a statement of Rav Acha. Actually, we're just concluding this now. We're concluding a Gemara that sort of had a discussion. Then we got sidetracked with some other stuff, and now we're going back to that discussion. And so the Gemara is going to make a final conclusion that the statement of Rav Acha was not exactly correct because we've proven it wrong. Now, once you prove it wrong, then you got to go back to the previous stuff, the previous discussions, and say, we proved what he said wrong. So the way we explained some of the things earlier is also wrong. Because if his statement is wrong, and we were assuming that it was correct earlier, so we explained certain things based on trying to answer up, how does that reconcile with what he said? But now that we see that what he said is wrong, we don't need to reconcile what he said with those statements, and it could be the meaning of those statements are a little different. So, for example, one of the questions that we had before brought up this concept of tadir v'she'enai tadir, something that's more frequent and something that's less frequent. And that statement of tadir v'she'enai tadir, just pull it up over here. That statement was talking about when you have the song of Rosh Chodesh and the song of Shabbos. So they would sing a song, they would play musical instruments and sing this from the Psalms. They would do that during these musafs. And the Gemara brought a brisa that had said, this was on 54b, the Gemara brought a brisa that said that the musaf song that you do when you have a combination of Rosh Chodesh and Shabbos on the same day, you do the Rosh Chodesh one, and it pushes off the Shabbos. You push aside the Shabbos, do Rosh Chodesh. That was the Gemara's statement. That was a brisa that the Gemara brought. And the Gemara says, so if you're pushing off the Shabbos and you're only doing the Rosh Chodesh, and that's for the song, guess what? That would mean that the blowings of the trumpet are also going to be pushed off. And you're only going to do one blowings of trumpets because you're pushing off the song of Shabbos, because you only do one shir, one song of instruments and singing that the Levites would do for the Musaf. They wouldn't do two, they would do one. In the brisa sounds like if you're only doing one song, you probably are only going to do, it would make sense logically, because the trumpets were blown during the time that they would sing the song. So if you're blowing the trumpets when they sing the song, and they're only singing one song, so guess what? They're only going to do the 9 blasts of the trumpet, not 18. They're not going to do two of the 9 series of 9 blasts, because you're only doing one song, and each song gets a series of 9 blasts. So the trumpets are also going to be only one series of 9 blasts. That would prove Rav Acha wrong, because Rav Acha said you got to do 2 series of 9 blasts, 2 musafs blasts, which would be 2 series of 9. The Gemara answered that earlier and said, no, it's not a contradiction, because it doesn't mean it pushes it off. It means what prioritize. What's the priority? We prioritize Rosh Chodesh, first Rosh Chodesh, but now you push off Shabbos. You do Shabbos, but you push it till after. So you're doing both. It's just we don't know the order. The order, we're going to do Rosh Chodesh first. That was the Gemara. That's the Gemara's answer. Well, guess what? Now that we've proven Rav Acha wrong, his statement that he claimed you do two songs, and now we got to reevaluate this brisa. And now we're going to say, you know what it really means? It really means that you push off the song of Shabbos. So in other words, the way we explained it earlier was based on Rav Acha, assuming Rav Acha's statement was correct. But now that we've proven Rav Acha's statement wrong, now it messes up the previous, all the foundation that we built on that is also wrong. So it comes out that you go back and you say, oh, so it comes out that on Rosh Chodesh that there's a Shabbos Rosh Chodesh is the same day, which happens every 7 months, 6 months. You got to, because every month is there's Rosh Chodesh, or every 5 months. Keeps going in order. One day Rosh Chodesh is on Sunday, the next Rosh Chodesh is Monday and Tuesday, the next one is Wednesday. So every at least twice a year you have Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. Now, what do you do when Shabbos is on Rosh Chodesh? Because in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, would they sing the two songs or one song? So according to what we're concluding, it means they would only do the Rosh Chodesh song and not the Shabbos song. So again, I'm just bringing up that we now have to look back and say some of the things that we built on are going to change. And we had a little discussion. What happens in today's day and age? Today's day, I mean, when it falls, Rosh Chodesh falls on Hanukkah, on Shabbos. So it's one of the few times in the year that you can have 3 Sefer Torahs out at the same time. Why? Because you need one Torah scroll for the weekly Torah reading, and one for Rosh Chodesh, and one for Hanukkah. So it doesn't happen every year that you have a Shabbos that Rosh Chodesh that falls on Shabbos of Teves, but every few years you do have that happen, and you have to bring out 3 Sefer Torahs, because Rosh Chodesh falls on Shabbos and it's on Hanukkah, because there's always one of the days of Hanukkah is always Rosh Chodesh Teves, but it doesn't always fall on Shabbos. So you always have Hanukkah and Rosh Chodesh fall on the same day, but sometimes you have all 3: Rosh Chodesh, Shabbos, and Hanukkah. Now, why do I pick this case? Because in this case you have haftarahs. What haftarahs are you supposed to read? Well, Shabbos deserves a haftarah, and Rosh Chodesh deserves a haftarah, and Hanukkah deserves a haftarah when it falls on Shabbos. In other words, you have to decide which haftarah you're going to read. And the conclusion, believe it or not, is that we read the Hanukkah haftarah. Now, the Gemara that we learned says that when something is more frequent, you generally follow the thing that's more frequent. What's the most frequent thing? Would be Shabbos, and then would come Rosh Chodesh. In other words, the weekly haftarah would make sense to do, and then the Rosh Chodesh haftarah would make sense to do. And believe it or not, in Shulchan Aruch, it says that you do the Chanukah haftarah. Now, the Chanukah is the least frequent because you only have 8 days of Chanukah a year. Rosh Chodesh, you have 18 days of Rosh Chodesh a year. And so the question is, why, when it comes to the Torah reading, so we first do the weekly Torah reading, then we do the Rosh Chodesh reading, and then we do the Chanukah reading, the reading for Chanukah. So that makes sense. You're going according to the order of the Tadir, what's more usual. When it comes to the Haftarah, interestingly enough, we push off. When it comes to the Haftarah, we push off the Rosh Chodesh and the Shabbos for the Chanukah one. So it deserves to be understood how that works. Now, the thing is that our Gemara mentioned this concept of what's more usual and what's less usual, in a sense. When you prioritize one over the other, you prioritize the things that happens more often over the thing that happens less often, less frequent. The Gemara does not seem to use that logic when you're going to do one and we don't know which one to choose. It doesn't say then you choose the frequent one. When you're going to choose one and not do the others, then it could be that you choose the less frequent one because it'd be specifically because it's less frequent, it must be something special. When it comes to prioritizing things, we're going to do both. We just don't know which one to do first. Then we'll say, do the thing that's more usual, more common. So that would actually fit with what we do on the Torah reading and the Haftorah. Because in the Torah reading, you do the Shabbos, then you do Rosh Chodesh, then you do Hanukkah, it fits. But the Haftarah, you're not going to do all of them. You're only doing one Haftarah. So when it comes to the Haftarahs, it's not a question of prioritizing. It's a question of which one do we choose and which one do we knock off. There is not a question of prioritizing. There's reason to say, well, we have Persume Nisa of Hanukkah. We want to publicize the miracle of Hanukkah, and therefore we're gonna do the Hanukkah Haftarah because that is the unique one, and it's not an issue of prioritizing. We're not questioning which one to prioritize. We're questioning which one to actually choose and knock off the others. And in that case, we're going to choose the most unique one, the special one, the Persume Nisa one, the one that has a great miracle that we're publicizing, and therefore we do the Haftarah of Hanukkah. Now, that's one reason why we do it that way. There is another reason why we do it that way, and that is because what did we just finish reading in the Torah? We just finished the Hanukkah stuff in the Torah. So you do the Haftarah based on the final recital. The Haftarah is based on the final recital of the Torah reading is what you do in the Haftarah. Haftarah means the dessert, really. It's the end, the Haftarah, not from the word Torah. Haftarah just means the conclusion, the end, like the dessert. So the Haftarah is based on the final reading of the Torah, and therefore you would do the Hanukkah versus the others. So there's two reasons why we do Hanukkah Haftarah. One is because Persume Nisa, and that would be based on this concept of you don't do the more frequent if you're only choosing one. You only do the more frequent if you need to prioritize one over the other first, which one to do first, then you do the more frequent one. But when it comes to choosing one versus the other and not doing the other at all, then we don't do the more frequent. We actually do the more unique or the more special Persume Nisa. So there we're going to do Hanukkah versus the Rosh Chodesh and the Shabbos. When it comes to so basically the rule of Tadir v'she'enoi Tadir possibly only applies when you're going to do both and we don't know which one to do first. That idea, that qualification to this rule could be based on our Gemara, because our Gemara only asked the question about Tadir v'she'enoi Tadir, about doing something first, only when the Gemara came to the conclusion that you're going to do both. You're going to do both. Then Tadir v'she'enoi Tadir. Then you have to do the Tadir v'she'enoi Tadir. It didn't ask the question of choose the frequent one when it said we're going to do one versus the. It didn't ask the question, well, why are you choosing that one versus? It didn't ask Tadir v'she'enoi Tadir. You should choose the more frequent one. Then it only asked the question when the Gemara concludes that we're going to do both. Then the Gemara says, oh, you're doing both. Then you got to prioritize the more frequent one. But when the Gemara said you're going to do one, it didn't question, well, maybe you should do the more frequent one versus the less frequent one. If you're choosing one, choose the more frequent one. The Gemara doesn't ask it there. So this would be a source to that concept that the rule of Tadir is qualified to only be in a case where you're going to do both. Now, this is very nice, and the Tosfos Rid learns this way. However, the regular Tosfos on our page, on page 54b, actually disagrees with this. And he says, no, the rule of Tadir applies in all cases. So he actually argues with this concept. But the Gemara itself definitely sounds more like the Tosfos Rid. In other words, our Gemara seems to be a proof to the way the Tosfos Rid holds. And that fits with the first answer of why Shabbos Chanukah, Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Chanukah, do we recite the Haftarah of Chanukah? Because when it comes to doing only one, you'll choose Chanukah. You don't choose the more frequent one. Why? Because the rule of frequency doesn't apply when you're only going to do one. So that would fit with the first answer. Taisus probably would understand the second answer, and he would say, you know why Hanukkah you only do you know why you do the Haftarah of Hanukkah? Because you just finished reading the Torah with Hanukkah about the menorah, so therefore you're going to do the Hanukkah Haftarah. Now the answer, the second answer that I explained, would fit with the way Taisus reads. The question is, how does Taisus learn our Gemara? That you have to come up with a way how he could learn the Gemara. Why didn't the Gemara ask this question earlier? When the Gemara was talking about only doing one, the Gemara should have asked the question of, you should do the frequent one. Why didn't the Gemara ask it when it understood it to be that you're only doing one? Why does the Gemara only ask it when it understands you're going to do both Musaf songs? The Gemara there should have asked, the Gemara there asks why you should do the frequent one first. The Gemara should have asked it earlier when it talks about doing only one Musaf song. It should have said, well, do the more frequent one. It didn't ask it there. Why? Why didn't ask it there if the rule applies there? According to Tosfos, the rule applies even in such a case. So why doesn't the Gemara ask it there? So the commentaries struggle to figure out, how did Tosfos learn? One of the answers to how Tosfos learned, and I'll just conclude this discussion with this, and of course, if Jeffrey wants to say something, but let me just tell you what one of the commentaries says. He says that the Gemara understood and knew that we need to publicize Rosh Chodesh. And if you're only going to do one and not the other, even though normally you would say, well, do the frequent one, but here there was something that overrides that, and that is the fact that Rosh Chodesh needs publicity. And the Gemara knew that even in the question. Rosh Chodesh needs publicity. You need to tell people it's Rosh Chodesh. You need to, and the rabbis weren't questioning what day is Rosh Chodesh. It's for sure this day, and so you need to publicize that. And if you're not going to do the song of Rosh Chodesh at all, then you're missing out in a major publicity opportunity. And therefore, even though normally we would say do the frequent thing first, but the Gemara understood if you're only going to do one thing, we're not going to go by frequency. We're going to say, well, Rosh Chodesh is crucial. You got to do Rosh Chodesh. When the Gemara says you're doing both, you're doing both, then the Gemara says, well, the Rosh Chodesh law, maybe, that idea that Rosh Chodesh needs publicity, okay, you're going to publicize it anyway. You'll just do it after. Do the Shabbos first before the Rosh Chodesh, because Shabbos is more frequent. That's what the Gemara asks. The Gemara answers no. Not only about publicizing Rosh Chodesh, publicizing it is crucial. That even to do it first, the Gemara says, even if you're going to do both, do it first. That's what the Gemara's conclusion. So in other words, the conclusion of the Gemara was not that we didn't know that we need to publicize Rosh Chodesh. We know we need to publicize Rosh Chodesh, but to give it that overriding emphasis in prioritization, that's what we didn't know. And therefore, that's what the Gemara says, yeah, you really need to overdo it. Rosh Chodesh needs to prioritize it. Do it first, even. Not just do it. In other words, the Gemara knew this idea that Rosh Chodesh needs some type of publicity and emphasis. You got to tell people it's Rosh Chodesh. It's got to be part of, and therefore, if you're only going to do one, the Gemara understood that Rosh Chodesh would override the prioritization of, it would prioritize over the frequent thing, which would be Shabbos. The Gemara didn't know that when you're doing both, then you should do it first. That didn't seem to be so important, because you're gonna people are gonna find out the Shabbos, because you're gonna do you're doing both. You'll do the song. Okay, do Shabbos first. You do Rosh Chodesh right after. What's the big deal? And the Gemara's answer is no. This really needs a major publicity, that the rabbis establish this day as Rosh Chodesh. It's definite. It's solid. It's concrete, and it has to. It's official. So that's the way Tosfos would learn the Gemara, and that's why the Gemara didn't ask the question of Tadir Rishena Tadir earlier, because it knew that we're going to override that rule. We're going to override that rule because the Rosh Chodesh needs this publicity. So that's one way of learning, one way the commentaries mention. Okay, so that's the previous Gemara. Now, yes, Jeffrey.
So I think that we also studied, maybe Tosfos also would use that, we also studied that the Kohanim would put the Rosh Chodesh
Hey, Warren. Good morning.
fats that had to be burned in a special place so that people could see it. It was separate from the regular offerings on Shabbos or in a regular day.
Right. In other words, what Jeffrey's saying is that there was a previous Gemara that talked about, we learned about putting the limbs or the fats of the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh higher up than the other sacrifices. And the reason for that is because we want to emphasize Rosh Chodesh, right? It seems to be this concept of emphasizing Rosh Chodesh. One of the questions that's asked on that is, but you're putting it up, but you're also bringing a Musaf of Shabbos, and you're also putting that higher up. So how do you know? So how are people going to know that it's Rosh Chodesh? And the answer is Rosh Chodesh has much more sacrifices. So they'll see, the 7 sacrifices. They'll know that it's Rosh Chodesh, even though you're also putting the Musaf of Shabbos up there. But yeah, that's the reason. It's brought in the commentaries in Tractate Talmud that's the reason. Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey. You have a good point.
Also, connected with that is this was from a time when the Rosh Chodesh was dependent on the visual testimony.
Right, of course.
Okay, and so if you think about it, it's very, very a short period of time when the person who might have seen the first sliver of the new moon could come to Jerusalem to report on that in time for them to declare Rosh Chodesh before it became Shabbos, or like almost simultaneously with it becoming Shabbos, because you can only see it. They're like right at sunset, that little piece of the new moon. It's very, very short period of time. So you can't wait till night because then it's already Shabbos. And I don't think they could conclude that and declare that it was a new Chodesh before they had a calendar when it was already Shabbos.
We have to look it up. My understanding is if it's the 30th day, no, they would do it. Of course, they would travel on Shabbos. Of course, the Mishnahs talk about them traveling in the wagons on Shabbos and transgressing the Shabbos for Kiddush HaChodesh, and there's a mitzvah, even if extra people came, and they would make a for sure.
But could they declare it once it was already Shabbos?
On Shabbos,
they could come to testimony.
Yeah, so he would see it on Shabbos. You'd have to see it. So I don't even think you could see it before. I don't know if that's
only it's very close to sunset that you can see it. Only, I believe, on the first night. But
according to you, according to that, you're actually seeing it on the 29th. Is that possible? I don't think that's possible. No, you can't see it.
Remember, it's 29 and a half days. The cycle is really 29 and a half days.
Yeah, so how could they see it? It's impossible for them to see it then.
They came to with
it was possible. Through this, we need to learn Rosh Hashanah.
Well, yes, that would be good too. But you remember some of the pictures that try to show you what's happening, and they show you that one of the rabbis, maybe it was Gamliel, who had pictures on the wall, of all the different phases of the moon,
right?
And he could test them out to see if it did look like this or did it look like that,
right? But I'm not. Again, you might be right. I'm not sure exactly how, if it was ever possible to see it before the 30th, because the 30th would mean that it's the 30th is day 1 for the next month, and it's not day 30 of the previous month. In other words, if they see it on the 30th, then 30th becomes day 1. If they sanctify that day, so they would see it that day. So your example, I'm not sure if it's correct, and it might be, but the fact that you would need to see it then, I don't think is correct, because you could see it the night of Shabbos and travel on Shabbos and have it done that next day. I'm pretty, that's the way I've always learned. Okay.
But also, the other problem is that we have changed the Torah readings since the ancient times. And they didn't read as much as we read. They wouldn't read from 3 scrolls for an hour in that ancient time. And we know that from the special readings in Adar. So they would read probably only the special reading in the original arrangement. They didn't read the Torah in 52 weeks or whatever, 54 weeks. So when they adjusted it, they had to make a new rule about what you're going to read and when you're going to, what order you're going to read things in. Because we also prioritize the haftorahs in Adar that have to do with the subjects of the third reading and not with the Torah reading of the day.
So, but what you're saying about the fact that they didn't read the same as we read, as much as we read, there is something it is brought down that there is a custom that was a little complicated, but that they would divide the Torah into 3 parts, and every portion you would read you would finish the Torah in 3 years instead of 1 year. But that custom was somewhat complicated, and it definitely does not seem that everyone would do it that way. There seemed to be a, sort of like a small group that would maybe follow such a thing. And the Rambam brings it down, and he mentions that there was such a custom. But I think my understanding of the Rambam is that the vast majority of the Yidden would do it the way we do it, and do the whole Torah portion. So again, we have to look over in Masechta Megillah where it deals with reading the Torah and the different readings, just to to see if I'm not sure if that's what you're basing what you're saying on Tractate Megillah. Is that they would have to double check over there. But
they remembered that there was an earlier period when they didn't read the same way. In any case.
Let's look that up, if you don't mind. If you could find that the source for that, that would be your homework.
See how I can find. Okay, very good. Thank you very much.
That'd be interesting. Okay, in any event, the Gemara that we learned on Thursday, or on Friday, I should say, the Gemara we learned on Friday was a Gemara that brought a question on Rav Acha, meaning that the Gemara had proven Rav Acha wrong. It said Tiyufta de Rav Acha Tiyufta. The Gemara brought a proof that it can't be what he says is correct, because we had a teaching, a brisa of that Rava Bar Shmuel had brought, that the blowings of the same way the blowings on Shabbos that you do when it's only Shabbos, and there's blowings of Rosh Chodesh that are done when it's only Rosh Chodesh. So you would think that just like you do each of those blowings, so maybe you should do them even when the Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh coincide, and say, well, let's do each of them, each of these individual blowings. The Torah tells us uber Roshei Chodshechem that you don't. You only do one of the blowings. You don't do both. And in the Musaf, during the Musaf, instead of doing both of these blowings, you only do one. And that proves Rav Acha completely wrong. And the Gemara tried to explain 2 ways how you see that in the pasuk of Roshei Chodshechem. The Brisa says it brings a pasuk of Roshei Chodshechem, and it proves that you don't do both, you only do one. And it had 2 ways. We had Abaye's way and we had Rav Ashi's way. Abaye learned from the fact that it says Uva Roshei Chodshechem, it includes all the months, and it talks about Rosh Chodesh, it includes all of them together, and it compares them, and it says that all Rosh Chodeshes should be the same. Don't change any Rosh Chodesh. If the Rosh Chodesh is if it's Rosh Chodesh Shabbos, or it's plain Rosh Chodesh, Rosh Chodesh with Rosh Hashanah, all Rosh Chodeshes are equal. You only do one blowing, one musaf blowing. So that you see from Uvarashe Chodshechem that all Rosh Chodeshes are the same. And according to that, it proves that whenever you have two musafs, you basically suffice with one blowing. Rav Ashi says that you don't learn it the way Abaye learned it. You have a slightly different way of learning it, that it says Uva Rashe, that there's two heads to the Reish Chodesh. Rashe means heads, plural, and Chod Shechem is missing a yud, sounds singular. So what it sounds like is when you have two Roishes, when you have two heads, only do a singular musaf blowing. You have two heads, Rosh Chodesh and Rosh Hashanah. That is a Rosh Chodesh that has two heads, Rosh Chodesh and Rosh Hashanah. And what do you do then? Only do Chod Shechem one. Do one blowing. And so when you have two heads, do one blowing. That means that you're only going to do the series of 9 blasts once, even though it's Rosh Chodesh and it's Rosh Hashanah. And that basically would mean that you never do two blowings for the two musafs. You always only do one musaf blowing. That's the understanding of Rav Ashi of how you learn it from the verse. Anyway, Rava Bar Shmuel had learned this, brought this brisa. He taught us this brisa, and this brisa proves Rav Acha wrong. Proves Rav Acha wrong, and then the Gemara says that, and let's bring another question on Rav Acha. And what's the other question on Rav Acha? And there it went through a whole series of psalms that were sang on the Chol HaMoyed days of Sukkot, the end days of the middle and final days of Sukkot. Sukkot is 7 days in Eretz Yisrael, and you have the first day is Yom Tov. You didn't do the Simchas Beis HaShoeva on Yom Tov, but you would do it on the final 6 days. You just skip the first. So the brisa that the Gemara brings, it mentions Chol HaMoyed, each of the days of Chol HaMoyed. How many days of Chol HaMoyed are there in Israel? In Israel, you have 6 days of Chol HaMoyed. The 6th day is actually called Hoshana Rabbah, but it's still part of Chol HaMoyed. It's in Chutzalar, it's outside of Israel. We don't have that many days of Chol HaMoed, because one of the days, the first day of Chol HaMoed in Israel, outside of Israel, is the 2nd day of Yom Tov. We have a 2-day Yom Tov, so we lose 1 day of Chol HaMoed. So we end up with 5 days of Chol HaMoed here outside of Israel. But in Israel, there's 6 days of Chol HaMoed, and the brisa brings what song was sang during the musafs of the 6 days of Chol HaMoyed, that they would do the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. So they basically would have special songs in connection with Simchas Beis HaShoeva. So what were those songs? So again, there were 6 days of Simchas Beis HaShoeva, and each of those days you would have special song that the Levites would sing and play instruments for the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, and those Musaf songs were when they would do the extra blowings of Musaf. Now, what are we gonna? So what do we see? What were those songs? So the brisa brings down. First one is chapter 29 of Tehillim, Haval Hashem b'nei Elim, and the second one was Rasha Omer Lakim in Tehillim chapter 50, and then the third one is Mi Yakum Li Amarayim, was in chapter 94, and the fourth one was Bino Bayarim Ba'am, also chapter 94. And then the 5th day of Chol HaMoed, Sukkot, was chapter 81 of Tehillim. And then the sixth day, the final day of which is Hoshana Rabbah, you would do chapter 82. So you had different psalms from the book of Psalms, and that's what they would play instruments with, and it was in connection to the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, something special for the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. Now, the morning Simchas, the morning sacrifice also had songs, but they didn't switch it for Sukkot. That was just the regular songs. But the songs of the Musaf, that's what they would switch, and they would. The truth is the same thing as the Tamid Shel Bein Harabayim. Even the afternoon Tamid had songs as well. The afternoon communal sacrifice had songs as well. But that was the regular weekday, the daily song. But for Musaf, they would switch it. And they would have something connected to the Simchas Beis HaShoeva and to Sukkot. So it was a special Musaf song. And this was the order. Now, the problem was, what happens if Shabbos fell on one of these days? So what do? So the order of these songs was always the same. You always had this order. And at least according to this was the order according to Rav Safra. We're going to see that Rav Papa said the order was Hasiroisi before Binu Bayarim. So he had what we have as day 4 and 5, which was Rav Safra's way. So it says Rav Papa actually had what we said is 5 was really day 4, and we said was day 4 was really day 5. So there seems to be a little question of what the order, what the exact order is. But this is the order no matter what. Now, this is the order no matter what. Now, what happens when Shabbos falls on one of those days of Chol Hamoed? It doesn't have to fall during those days of Chol Hamoed, but what happens if it does?
Hello.
If Shabbos falls on one of those days of Chol Hamoed, so then you have to do the Shabbos song. And you're going to do the Shabbos song, so you got to push off one of those. So do you skip it and just jump to the next one the next day? In other words, the day after Shabbos, what do you do about that song? So the Gemara says, no, you don't skip it. The Gemara says, instead of finishing all of these 6 songs, which you normally did day 1, the song number 1, day 2, song number 2, and instead of doing it, you lose out that last one. That's it. You might do Yidoche. The last one, you lose out. Why do you lose it out? Because we're not switching the order. We're keeping this order no matter what. The first day is the letter Hey. You would do Havu LaHashem B'nei Elam, letter Hey. The second day started with a letter Vav. It was V'la Rasha Amar Elokim. The second day always started with the letter Vav. Now, what happens when Shabbos fell on the second day? So the third day, you would do the letter Vav. You always do this order. Don't skip it because Shabbos fell on that day. You would just push it off to the next day. And instead of it being on the second day, let's say, it was supposed to be the letter Vav, V'la Rasha Amar Elokim, push it to the third day and keep this same order. Shabbos will just take up its day, but don't mess around with the order. In the end, you'll end up losing out on the last one, which was called Yimaitu, was the letter Yud. That gets pushed off because you had a day of Shabbos here and you ended up losing one day. So that last one you never reach. You do, but always do this order. And what the Gemara understands from this is that if you're only doing one of these on Shabbos and you're not doing both, it must be that the blowings would be the same thing. That you're only going to do one blowing and not both blowings because you only have one song. And it comes out that Rav Acha held you do 2 songs, and this brisa shows us that no, the Chol HaMoed song is knocked off because you're doing the Shabbos song. So this proves Rav Acha wrong again. We've now again proven him wrong. And it says Yimoitu is Yidache is pushed off. It's not that you would do it also on Shabbos. It's Yidache. It's pushed off. It doesn't say, well, do the song of the Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Chodesh. No, it's Yidache. It's pushed off. That means that you only do one song. And if you're only doing one song, that's when you would blow the trumpets during the song. So if you're only doing one song, you're only doing one of the series of trumpets for Musaf. And this would prove as well this concept of the fact that you don't do both, you only do one. And so what it comes out is that we've proven Rav Acha again. We've proven him wrong, the interesting thing is, why do you need 2 proofs of Rav Acha to prove him wrong? 1 proof should be good enough. What is the Gemara coming to bring a second proof? We proved it wrong. So the thing is, that's interesting. Rav Acha himself, he didn't say his own. He didn't make up his own ruling over here. He brought a brisa. So who says his brisa is worse off than the brisa that Rava Bar Shmuel brought? Very nice. We have Rava Bar Shmuel brought a brisa that proves Rav Acha wrong. Well, not really. The first proof that he's wrong is not exactly a solid proof. It's a different brisa. One brisa says one thing, his brisa said another. Rav Acha brought a brisa. So, okay, he explained the brisa his way, but still, who says one is better? So now the Gemara brings a second brisa. Oh, we got 2 brisas, and we're not completely convinced of Rav Acha's law in the first place. It sounded a little strange in the first place, So therefore, the Gemara brought a second proof to say that Rav Acha is wrong. Another point, another understanding of this, why the Gemara is going to bringing 2 proofs, is that Rav Acha really taught 2 laws. He taught one law about the blowings, that you do both blowings. But what he also was really saying is, and guess what? You also do both songs. Because the blowing and the songs go hand in hand. They would divide the song into 3 parts, and they would blow tekiah, teruah, tekiah. In each of those 3 parts, you'd have 9 blows blast during the songs. So each of the songs is connected to the blowings. The song and the blowing go hand in hand. Now, Rav Acha, when he said that, guess what? You got to do both blowings. The blowing of Rosh Chodesh, the blowing of Shabbos, all the Musafs get each one gets its own blowing. That's what Rav Acha was teaching us. Okay, but guess what he's also teaching us? That each Musaf gets their own songs. So when the Gemara proves him wrong, it proves both points wrong. It says, we proved wrong that you only have 1 blowing. And then the Gemara says, and let's prove wrong that you also only have 1 song. And so the second brisa is really proving that you have only 1 song, even though there's multiple musafs, you only have 1 song. And so therefore the Gemara brings a second brisa, which has to do with the songs. And the first brisa had to do with the blowings. That is the understanding of why we're going to need 2. I'd like to do this inside again. So let's start from Mesave. No, Void. Let's start from Void, actually. Void is, let me tell you where we're starting. V'oid Tanya. There's a dot in the middle of the Gemara. It must be about 15 lines from the top on page 55a. Maybe 14 lines from the top. 55a, in the middle of the page, in the middle of the line, there's a dot there. At least my Gemara has a dot. I don't know if everyone's Gemara has that dot. No, you don't even have that dot there. So it says va'oid. The word is va'oid. So 55a, 14 lines from the top. The Oid Tanya, and it was also taught in Brisa. This is the second question on Rav Acha. And again, we're going to prove that when you have multiple musafs, which is the multiple additional sacrifices, because Rosh Chodesh, Shabbos go together, Rosh Chodesh, Rosh Hashanah, every Rosh Hashanah fall is a Rosh Chodesh as well, and then sometimes Shabbos and Yom Tov sometimes fall out every Yom Tov and Shabbos. So you often have musafs, multiple musafs. Do you have multiple songs for those musafs? Do you have the each musaf get their own song, or is it one song per day of musaf, per musaf day? So the Gemara brings additional brisa. Va'oid Tanya, another brisa. It was also va'oid. Additionally, Tanya was taught in a brisa. V'chayla shamayid on cholamayid, v'rishayin on the first day of cholamayid, which means the second day of Sukkot. Mahayu, I remember, what would they sing? What would the Levium sing for the song of the Musaf? So on the first day of Cholamayid, which means the second day of Sukkot, they would sing Haval Hashem Elim. They would do the Psalm number 29. Biyam Sheni on the second day, Mahayu, what would they say? Valarasha Amar Lakim. That Psalm, which is Psalm 50. And on the third day, Biyam Shlishi, Mahayu, what would they sing? What would the Levites sing for the Musaf of the third day of Cholamayid, which means the fourth day of Sukkot? It's mi yokum liyam merayim. This Psalm number 94. B'yam revi mahayu. What would they sing on the fourth day of Chol Hamoed, which is the fifth day of Sukkot? Binu bayarim ba'am. Also Psalm number 94. B'yam chamishi on the fifth day. Mahayu. What would they sing? What would the Levium say? Which means what would they sing? Hasiraisi Miseval Shichbay, Psalm number 81. Psalm 81. B'yom Shishi on the sixth day, which is really the final day of Sukkot. It's Hoshana Rabbah on the sixth day of Chol Hamoed. Mahi, what would they sing? You might do Kol Meisiyar at Psalm number 82. So each of these psalms had something to do with either giving to the poor, which is the time of gathering. They would have to give tithings to the poor. They would something to do with the simcha of the mayim, the nisocha mayim, and then each one had something to do with people doing tshuva. Each one is connected to the holiday of Sukkot. Also bringing the karbanos had to do with bringing the sacrifices, that when people would make a promise to bring a sacrifice, you had to finish bringing them by Sukkot. The order was that you had up to 3 regals to bring it, and this would be the final holiday. Would be that a person would transgress if they didn't bring it. They would transgress Val Ta'acher, a prohibition in the Torah. So therefore, so it talks about bringing your sacrifices and so on by this holiday. So all of them were very connected to Sukkot and to water, Simchas Beis HaShoeva, Haval Hashem B'nei Elim, Kavod Va'oz. It had to do with the Kavod and Oz, the Simcha, which is the Machabed Hashem with rejoicing in front of him. We're honoring Hashem with rejoicing. Kavod Va'oz, also connected to the Nisoch Hamayim, Kol Hashem. Kol Hashem ala Mayim, ala Kavod Hiram, Hashem al Mayim Rabim, maybe connected to the Nisoch Hamayim, and it says coil 7 times, so it's symbolic of the 7 songs for that connected to the Nisoch Hamayim. Anyway, each of these paragraphs each of these songs were connected to Sukkot, and each one you did, and then the Gemara said each one was done on one day of the holiday of Sukkot. So it comes out that we have this order of all 6 days of the final days of Sukkot, besides for the first day, that was a separate thing. But the days of the end days of Sukkot, besides for the first, the 6 final days of Sukkot, was each of these psalms, and they were sang by the Levites. And during those psalms, of course, they would do the trumpet blowing. It doesn't mention that here, but that's when they would do the trumpet blowings. Now, Shabbos now, if Shabbos falls on any one of these days, and if so, you would be knocking off the psalm that day. But the question is, how do you deal with the order of the rest of them? So it says, Yimaitu Yidacha, the Yimaitu song, the Yimaitu Psalm, which is Psalm number 82, the 6th day, the final Hoshana Rabbah Psalm, it would be pushed off, and you would just keep up the order of all of these 6 Psalms, and in the end, you'll end up missing out in the last one because you lost out one day, but you kept the order right. The order stayed. You lose out the last one because you had a Shabbos during these days, during these last days of Sukkot, during the 6 final days of Sukkot. You had a Shabbos there, so it messed up one. So you lose out in the last psalm, but keep the order of the others. Don't skip one in the middle and end off with the days that you are. Don't skip one in the middle. Skip the final one. Okay, and that's actually our proof. That is where we have our proof to what we're bringing this whole brisa for. But before we get to our proof, before we say it, the Gemara does bring about the siman of these. But what is the real proof? The real proof that we prove Rav Acha wrong here is from this final sentence. If Shabbos falls on one of them, Yimaitu Yidache, you push off Yimaitu, which is the psalm that was normally sang on Hoshana Rabbah, and that psalm is pushed off because one of the days fell on Shabbos, so you're going to end up doing the psalm of Hasiroisi because you lost one in the middle. Everything gets pushed off a day, and the fifth day of Chol HaMoed ends up being the psalm that you're doing on the 6th day of Chol HaMoed. Now, that proves Rav Acha wrong, because why are you pushing one off? Instead, you should be doing both. That's what should happen when Shabbos falls on one of those days. No problem. Do Shabbos and do the psalm, and don't even bring it in. Why you bring it up even? Do both. And when it says Yimaitu Yidache, if it's a question of prioritizing, and you do both, and you just want to know which one to do first, then this Yimaitu Yidache doesn't fit. Yimaitu Yidache means leave out the last day's psalm. Well, if it's a question of prioritizing, then it would be which one do you do first? So it should just say either do Shabbos first or Sukkot first. Instead, it says Yimaitu Yidacha, which means push off one and don't do it at all. So it's not a question of prioritizing. This is an issue of how to do it. And the answer is definitely leave out the psalm of the Musaf of Sukkot. That's what it clearly says here. You lose that day's psalm. How do you do the end? Okay, you might do Yidacha. We'll figure it out how to do the last one. But the point that we want is that you do not do both psalms of Musaf. That's what you see clearly here. You're only doing one psalm of Musaf, the psalm of the Shabbos. Imchal Shabbos b'yechamem, you're going to have to deal with somehow you might do Yidacha, fixing up at the end. You push off the last day. You have to. But the psalm of Shabbos is the psalm of that day. According to Rav Acha, you do both. And we see here that that's not true. The Brisa says no. Now, the Brisa, the Gemara brings, on this Brisa, the Gemara brings a siman, which is a mnemonic way of remembering what, it brings a sign of how to remember the order of all of these psalms. So Rav Safra Manach Busimna Humbahi. Humbahi is not a word, but it basically, or at least I don't think it's a word, but it's basically telling you that, hey, this is the order. Think of Humbahi. You have hey, Havul Hashem b'nei Elam, Vav v'larasha Amalakim, Mem is Mi Yakum, Beis is Binu Bayram. The next hey is Hasiroisi, and the next Yud is Yimaitu. So that's the order. Humbahi. Now Rav Papa Manach Busimna Hum Habi. and Rav Papa gave the sign a different order, because his order was the order of we have Rav Safra, Rav Papa. His order is switching two of those, the fourth and the fifth day. So his is Hum Habi. And the Gemara then says, now, how are you going to remember who's who? How are you going to remember Rav Papa is the Hum Habi and Rav Safra is Hum Bahi? So the Gemara says, if you want to remember that, we'll give you another sign. The Simnaich, and the simon to remember that is Ambuha de Safri. That, I guess there's a word, Ambuha de Safri, which is the some type of a soldiers, troops of that Ambuha de Safri. Well, Safri means the students, the teachers of the students, and
it says here it's a convoy of scribes.
Of what?
Scribes.
Yeah, but what it means is the envoy of the people, like troops, people, or groups of people, I should say better. Groups of people, the men and women who would bring their kids to the scribes, Ambua de Safri. So, I guess that was a common word. I'm sorry? What did you say?
Convoy.
Excuse me. Convoy of, thank you, of the parents, the people, of that would go to this, that would bring their kids to the scribes. I guess that was a term used. So Safri is like Rav Safra. Now, we of course, it means the scribes, the teachers, the teachers of the students. And Ambuha is that the bays goes before the hay. Ambuha. So if you think of this word, Ambuha de Safri, you see the base goes before the hay. So therefore, you know that Rav Safra, whose the name sounds like Safri, he's the one who holds that the base goes before the hay, that on the fourth day it's base and on the fifth day it's hay. And so that's how you remember that Rav Safra holds that order versus Rav Papa, who holds it would be the opposite order, that the hay would go before the base. So if you think of this term, Ambuha de Safri, you would be able to remember that Rav Safra is the base before the hay. And it's just a sign to make it easier to remember. But the main point is, and that is, Tiyufta de Rav Acha bar Chanina, Tiyufta, we have now proven Rav Acha bar Chanina